Diana L. Forsta, the only daughter of Marquis Forsta, always thought of herself as a lucky girl. Her father loved her so much that he missed the right time to marry her off, and so she ended up marrying the handsome Duke Calypso Zenes, who had nothing to offer but his looks. Even so, Diana was still happy. Their love wasn't passionate, but it was gentle and warm. Then Catherine was born, her first daughter. It was the happiest day of her life. Catherine became her whole world. Everything started to change when Catherine was blinded by a poisonous plant. The little girl cried incessantly, calling for her mama, saying she would never see pretty flowers or cute little birds again. Diana couldn't believe there was no cure. The family doctor, Alice, with a heavy voice, mentioned a magical way to transfer eyesight from one person to another. Diana was stunned to hear this, but she still told her husband to prepare the carriage to go to the temple. Calypso immediately understood his wife was about to do the unthinkable. He tried to stop her, but Diana loved Catherine more than her own life. At first, getting used to the darkness was not easy, but the protagonist believed she could endure it. Her childhood friend and family doctor, Alice, was always by her side, helping her through the difficult times. Everything seemed to be stabilizing until Diana overheard a conversation. The voices of Alice and her husband came from the study, whispering words of love that Diana couldn't ignore. Calypso and his lover immediately turned their heads when they heard a strange sound. Diana spoke with a trembling voice, begging her husband to say it was all a lie. She clung to the hope that she was just imagining things, determined not to face the truth. But the Duke remained silent. The woman collapsed to the floor, finally understanding the full tragedy. Calypso and Alice looked at each other and smirked. The protagonist was speechless as her childhood friend mocked her. "Are you really that stupid? You didn't realize after all those hints." She had been playing the part of a kind friend, while Diana couldn't utter a word. She could only plead with her dear husband. Calypso had had enough. He ordered his knights to seize the Duchess and lock her in the storage room. At that moment, Diana couldn't believe this was real. The knights locked the Duchess in a dusty storage room, said their goodbyes, and left her completely alone. She didn't know how many days had passed, but someone still secretly brought her moldy bread. The protagonist guessed it must be Catherine. The poor girl must be panicking and crying now. Diana had cried all her tears out during that time. Then one day someone came. She froze when she heard her daughter's voice, but it was full of mockery, asking if she was dead yet. Catherine stood at the door, smiling. "Oh, you're still alive, mother. Actually, Alice was hoping you'd have starved to death by now." Fury surged within the protagonist. She lunged at her old friend, ready to scratch her face to pieces. But Alice stepped aside, letting Diana fall to the floor. She called the protagonist a fool. Diana's eyes widened in horror as she realized Catherine was actually the daughter of her husband's mistress. The protagonist had given her sight to someone who was only pretending to be blind. Diana couldn't believe it. If Catherine wasn't her daughter, then where was her real child? And then a sinister smile appeared on Alice's lips. A knight entered the storage room, carrying a sack. The protagonist heard a heavy object fall beside her, and she froze. Alice said there was a servant who dared to disobey the new mistress. It was the girl who had been bringing Diana food all this time. The protagonist's trembling hands fumbled for the sack. Alice said that girl was just a servant her whole life, but blood can't be hidden. At the same time, Diana touched the cold face of her own daughter. Despair consumed her. She could no longer hold back her tears and screamed in agony. Alice told her old friend to be generous one last time and forgive her own child. Then she ordered the servants to spread poisonous powder in the storage room. The protagonist hugged her daughter, begging for forgiveness she knew she didn't deserve for failing to protect her. Her real daughter had fought until the very end for a mother who was a complete failure. After inhaling the poisonous powder, Diana collapsed to the floor. If there was a next life, the protagonist only wished for her daughter to return to start over. Next time, she would definitely not make the same mistake. When the protagonist woke up in her room, tears were still streaming down her cheeks. Diana looked around in confusion at the sudden light. Her trembling hands clutched the blanket. A maid burst in, throwing open the window curtains. Diana let out a faint sound, and the maid immediately realized her lady was awake. Everything Everything was too real to be a dream. When she asked the maid for the date, Diana realized she had returned to the very day she lost her sight, but now she could still see. It was proof that she had truly returned to the past and still had her sight intact. Now, Diana had a chance to save her daughter, a seemingly impossible opportunity. Therefore, the protagonist ordered her maid to take her to the servants' quarters. In fact, Alice had always had someone watching Diana, because even though she was blind, she never lost her noble demeanor. The maid didn't know what her lady was planning, but she followed her orders. The protagonist apologized to the gathered servants for calling them away from their work. Alice had bluntly said that her daughter had grown up in this place as a servant. Her real daughter's hands were rough and calloused, and she was indeed the same age as Catherine. Therefore, Diana decided to find out all the information she could from this place. She tried to remind herself that she was pretending to be blind, but she desperately wanted to tell the maids she trusted them. However, they just giggled and whispered that Alice was right, that spying on the blind Duchess was truly amusing. The protagonist had never met these maids before, but she suddenly remembered that before going blind, she had replaced all the servants. Since the Duchess was nothing special, the maids didn't even bother to try hard at their work. Previously, Calypso had told Diana that he had transferred all the staff elsewhere because there was an urgent need for manpower at the time. Alice reassured the protagonist and introduced reliable servants. Diana was moved and hugged her best friend tightly. She thought it was all for her sake, but in reality, everything had been calculated down to the last detail. The blonde woman fired all the servants. Diana's personal maid thought it was nothing serious, so she didn't report it to Alice. As she walked up the stairs, Diana ran into her daughter. Catherine stared at her with a cold gaze. Alice's daughter quietly approached the protagonist, waving a hand in front of her eyes to test if she was really blind, then smirked, placing a finger on her lips to shush the maid. Catherine stepped on the hem of Diana's dress, certain that no one would see her action. The protagonist lost her balance, stumbling down the stairs, her body aching. Catherine just let out a soft laugh. The maid rushed to help the lady up, assuming she had just tripped. Diana had truly loved Catherine more than anyone. And in return, she got betrayal from her husband, deception from the best friend she once trusted, and a fake daughter. She had to face the truth, and quickly, as there was no telling when those people would try to harm her again. Amidst the chaos, the protagonist wasn't even sure if she could find her real daughter or save her. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. The protagonist sat up and said, "Come in." Calypso and Alice entered together, full of confidence. The man was clearly annoyed, asking the protagonist how she felt after what had happened. Alice chuckled at the way he spoke. Diana replied that she was fine, just that she couldn't see anything. A cunning smile appeared on Alice's lips as she reached out to pull Calypso in for a kiss. Meanwhile, Calypso reassured the protagonist that everything was fine. The Duke added that she should speak up if she needed anything. The deceitful pair kissed right in front of Diana. The protagonist couldn't stand it anymore and told the Duke she felt a bit tired and wanted to be alone. He just smirked and told her to rest well. Overwhelmed with emotion, Diana rushed to the balcony for some fresh air. She would never forgive these people. She opened a cabinet, took out a tablecloth, then sat down at the table and began to write a letter. The bullies could only watch as she planned her revenge. Diana L. Forsta was born into the wealthy Forsta family, and her whole life had been dedicated to loving everyone. She frequently visited orphanages and always organized charity events. Importantly, Diana always emphasized that she was just an ordinary person, not famous or rich, and because of that, everyone loved her. Many saw her as an angel sent from heaven. Her reputation spread so far that even the Magic Tower had heard of her. A mage told Sir Rory that there was a letter for him. It turned out Marquis Forsta was looking for a magic tutor. Rory stiffened upon hearing this, even putting down the book he was reading. The Marquis wanted his daughter to learn magic and asked if a mid-level mage should be sent. Rory took the letter and immediately rejected the proposal. He planned to go see the girl himself. The protagonist sat at her desk, wondering who her father would send. Since her letters were being monitored, she had to write something very ordinary to avoid suspicion. The knowledge of magic and alchemy she learned as a child was finally proving useful, albeit because of her marriage. She had to give up her craft, but upon returning, she realized she needed to learn everything systematically from the ground up. Diana called for a maid and gave a firm order. Inform Alice and Catherine immediately that I invite them for tea in the garden. The maid couldn't believe her ears. Was this the same person from yesterday? The maid's silence prompted the protagonist to ask coldly, "Do you dare to defy the Duchess?" After that, the maid nodded and said she would deliver the message at once. Not long after, tea was served at the table. Alice was already there and told the Duchess that she should get used to not being able to see anymore. Her husband's mistress came from the family of Marquis Blair. To Diana, Alice had been a childhood best friend. When she heard Alice was coming to be the family doctor, she was so happy she almost jumped for joy. Now she realized how foolish she had been, and she couldn't understand how her husband's mistress dared to turn her daughter into a servant, while her own child became the daughter of a Duchess. But Diana tried to act cheerful. When she saw Catherine, she intentionally yanked the tablecloth, standing up and causing the teapot to spill all over the Duke's mistress's leg. Catherine and the head maid both froze in pain. The other girl screamed that the Duchess had hurt the doctor, while Diana pretended to apologize, her face full of sorrow. She sighed that she still wasn't used to being blind. Alice stood up, told Diana she was going to treat her burn, and left her with Catherine. Diana turned and, in a voice as sweet as a canary's, asked the girl to help her dress and read to her every morning. She remembered giving her very eyes to this girl. Catherine gritted her teeth. She hated Diana immensely, but couldn't refuse. Diana smiled and said, "Son, we'll see each other tomorrow morning." Alice clung to Calypso. "Darling, my leg hurts so much." He immediately reached out to examine it, thinking Diana wouldn't come to the office. But things took a completely different turn. Calypso looked at his wife, surprised, and asked, "What are you doing here?" Diana had never come to his office before. She always thought she would be a bother. He wondered, has she finally realized? Diana sat down next to her husband, sadly recounting how the servants had been ignoring her, whispering behind her back, so she decided to fire them all. Calypso signaled for Alice to leave immediately so he could handle it. Alice stood up, muttering and calling Diana a wretch. Diana asked her husband to bring back the old servants, but he said they were still needed elsewhere. She said she would send a letter to the Marquis. The woman looked strangely like her father, but Calypso still couldn't love her. Marquis Forsta held power comparable to the Emperor, which was why he had no choice but to marry Diana. Luckily, her carefree nature turned out to be a gold mine when she married into his family. Donations poured in. It was a perfect opportunity for Calypso to start a new business and avoid bankruptcy. But the Marquis always kept an eye on him, and he only wanted power, not an old man who could interfere at any moment. Therefore, the Marquis had to be kept in the dark. He asked Diana, "Can we call Sun and Milan?" The protagonist threw her arms around her husband and thanked him for finally agreeing. The real work began when night fell. Diana wasn't sleeping. She put her book down and decided to call a day. It was past dinner time, and no one had said anything. Now she sat hungry in her room. It seemed no one cared. But it didn't matter. Tomorrow the Duchess would fire everyone anyway. Diana was always hungry before. Her rebirth. The protagonist stepped out onto the balcony to breathe in the night air and admire the night view. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind blew, and a man's hand appeared out of nowhere. Ruhr suddenly appeared right in front of the protagonist and said he never thought his first student would be such a wonderful person. He was very happy to meet her. The protagonist stammered, asking who he was. It turned out this man was the next candidate for the position of Master of the Mage's Tower. The Marquis had summoned his daughter, so now Ruhr would be Diana's teacher. Her father had clearly overstepped, but nothing could be changed now. The young man handed back the blindfold that had slipped from her face and asked why she was wearing it. Diana said she was blind due to an accident. Ruhr replied that it sounded strange, and protagonist realized she couldn't easily fool a mage like him. But the young man just smiled and said he was only joking. Diana's face immediately flushed, but she was also relieved that the strange teacher hadn't discovered anything. Ruhr helped her tie the blindfold back on and then introduced himself, telling her she could call him whatever she wanted. The lessons would be held once a week at noon. He added that he would come to the palace himself whenever he had time, no need for anyone to pick him up. He told Diana to prepare everything as she wished. The protagonist found the teacher's natural style quite interesting, but still promised him that she would look forward to the upcoming lesson. Brewer smiled warmly at the Duchess's words. Suddenly, the protagonist felt a sharp headache, which startled the young man as soon as he saw it. An image of a crying man appeared in Diana's mind. He was trying to do something, but kept failing and starting over again. Each time, a voice echoed in her head, but Diana didn't recognize who it was. The protagonist told her two old maids the whole truth. Milan couldn't hold back her tears. Though it was hard to believe, she still asked what her lady planned to do next. Diana was determined to take revenge on those cruel people. Milan knelt before her lady and swore to dedicate her life to serving her. Sun also knelt beside her and promised to follow any command. The protagonist smiled gently and thanked them for their loyalty. Now, the young Duchess was ready to ask her trusted maids to do something for her tomorrow. Diana welcomed the newly arrived maids, congratulating them on starting their work at the ducal estate. Each maid received a velvet pouch. The Duchess told them to open it and see their first month's salary. When they saw the gemstones inside, the maids couldn't believe this was their real salary. The protagonist promised that she would cherish each and every one of them, but it came with a condition. Diana poured all the gemstones onto the floor and crushed them with her heel. She declared that she would respect every maid, as long as they did not interfere in matters that were not their business. The Duchess warned them not to betray her and to remember that they had only one master, Diana L. Forsta. All the maids replied in unison, "We understand." The protagonist was taking a walk on the villa grounds. She stopped short when someone called her name. The old maids knelt before her, trembling and begging to know why their lady had suddenly abandoned them like this. One girl started crying, begging to be hired back, but right in front of Diana, a blue-haired maid drew her sword and shouted at them to stay away. Last night, Diana had told Sun to find a female knight. The maid had asked if she couldn't just ask the Duke for help, but the protagonist explained that she needed a knight with no record who could pose as a maid. That person would be assigned an important mission. Diana told Belinda to stop. Those old maids clearly didn't realize their mistake. Those people had betrayed the Duchess, running to Alice for a few silver coins, and now they dared to come back and beg for forgiveness. Diana would not let any of them set foot in here ever again. Alice peeked from around a corner and muttered that those fools had dug their own graves and now looked pathetic. But she, a healer, sensed that something was unusual. In the end, the protagonist only kept the maid Julia. It was possible she knew all of Alice's plans. Therefore, Diana ordered her to watch Alice closely. Diana asked Milan about the progress of her previous request. The girl replied that so far, nothing had been discovered about her daughter. There was no one around 15 years old with calloused hands and a slender build in the ducal house. So the search had been expanded to the grounds outside. Diana nodded and told her to continue searching. The protagonist still didn't know where Alice was hiding the girl. The Duchess turned to Sun and ordered her to take Catherine to her room immediately. The maid nodded, while the girl struggled in protest upon hearing her fake mother's order. Sin said that her lady just wanted some quiet time to read. Catherine started to argue, but the maid just apologized and left quietly without another word. If Diana didn't see anything with her own eyes, she had to remain completely silent. Once her mother became the Duchess, that woman would be nothing. Catherine flew into a rage, smashing some teacups before storming over to the bookshelf and giving it a hard kick. A platinum blonde girl emerged from a secret door. Trembling, she asked if the young lady had called for her. Catherine grabbed Isol's hair and dragged her towards the table, then threw her violently next to the pile of broken porcelain. Alice's daughter screamed for someone to clean up this mess immediately, and when she returned, this place had to be spotless, or else Isol would be in big trouble. Catherine entered her fake adoptive mother's room and announced that she had arrived. The protagonist pointed out that she was late. The girl quickly apologized, saying she just forgot and thought everyone would overlook it as usual. Catherine flashed a smile and asked if her mother would forgive her. Diana glanced at her coldly and asked if Catherine truly didn't know that being on time was part of being a proper lady. Catherine stammered, mumbling that she knew. The protagonist crossed her arms and warned her not to be late again. Diana pointed to a huge pile of books that Catherine had to read to her today. Catherine was about to argue, but the Duchess reminded her that she couldn't read by herself and needed help. If she favored Catherine's voice so much, then Catherine was the one she wanted to hear. Catherine agreed, but only a moment later, she put the book down, crossing her arms and complaining that her throat was about to explode from reading continuously. The protagonist had always known Catherine was an extremely impatient person, but she never said it because she loved her daughter. Things were progressing faster than Diana had thought. She reminded Catherine that she was already 15 and perhaps she had raised her daughter to be too weak. Diana decided to cancel the meeting tomorrow with the Sawyer family's son. Catherine shot up from her chair, exclaiming, "What do you mean?" But the Duchess calmly replied, "I can't introduce a lady to my son if she can't even keep a promise to her own family." Catherine had been waiting for this day for a long time. At every gathering, she had secretly watched him. All she ever wanted was to be alone with the Duke's son. Her parents had no connection to the Sawyer family. Only Diana could help. The Duchess said that if Catherine behaved, she would arrange another meeting with him. Her face immediately lit up, and she promised never to be late again and to read to her mother every day. That child was so blinded by ambition that she was easy to manipulate. Catherine picked up the book and decided to continue reading, starting from today. The protagonist was preparing to start her magic lesson with a new teacher. Belinda informed the Duchess that she would guard the garden gate. Diana hoped this place would be suitable. Looking at the clock, the protagonist realized the lesson was about to begin. She guessed the teacher would appear suddenly, like last time, but this time she was no longer afraid. As expected, Ruhr appeared right in front of her, not a minute late. He greeted her, and the protagonist returned the greeting. The red-haired man said that he had been looking forward to this day for a long time and that it was an honor to train the Duchess. Diana let out a sigh of relief and smiled. Ruhr asked her what kind of magic she wanted to learn: attack, defense, or control. The protagonist hesitated. She remembered the last time she used magic. She shyly admitted that she wanted to start from the basics. Ruhr told her to roll up her sleeves and take it. Slowly, he began by showing her how to release her energy. Ruhr raised his hand, and in his palm was a flickering flame. Each type of energy has its own attribute: fire, water, ice, wind, lightning, and earth. They could use magic that corresponded to those attributes. Ruhr was skilled with fire, while Diana controlled ice. He told her to give it a try. Full of determination, the protagonist held out her hand and tried to release her power, but it backfired, making her blush with embarrassment. She hadn't expected to be so bad. Ruhr took Diana's hand, telling her to relax and concentrate to pull the magic out. She took a deep breath, focused all her attention on her fingertips, and tried the technique again. Just then, Calypso was walking by, and this time, the protagonist succeeded. She was so happy that she immediately clasped hands with her magic tutor, beaming at him. Just then, the Duke caught sight of this scene, seeing his wife standing next to another man. Calypso froze. He strode over to his wife, his voice tense, and asked her who the other man was. Diana calmly explained that it was her magic tutor, Ruhr. Since she had lost her sight and could no longer read books, she had decided to try learning magic. Calypso shot a fierce glare at his wife's teacher, which was laughable, as he had no reason to be jealous. Yet he was still jealous of another man being next to Diana. Diana introduced her husband, Calypso, to Ruhr. The mage smiled at the Duke and remarked, "You're about to burn me with that gaze of yours." Suddenly, Catherine approached, her voice hoarse from reading every day. She asked what her mother and father were doing there. Diana told Catherine to greet the teacher as well. When the protagonist introduced the magic tutor, a mischievous smile spread across Ruhr's face as he said, "It's strange that Catherine doesn't resemble her mother at all." Calypso immediately cut in, saying that comment was impolite. Diana explained that their daughter looked just like her father. Ruhr didn't understand at all why his last remark had upset the Duke so much. But Calypso insisted that, teacher or not, he shouldn't speak like that. A fiery bird suddenly appeared in front of the Duke. Although Calypso possessed the air and status of the nobility, he understood that it meant nothing in the eyes of the Magic Tower, where power was everything. The Magic Tower didn't care about status, only magical talent. And Teacher Ruhr was the one who held power there. Calypso immediately understood the message. He turned and walked away, saying coldly, "I'm busy. I have to go." Diana then began to feel that magic was something to be feared. She told Catherine to wait a moment, not to leave so quickly. Then the protagonist told her teacher that she had a small but important favor to ask. She wanted him to teach her daughter magic as well. Magic is an inherited ability, not something that appears randomly in humans. If the parents have magic, the children will inherit it too. Hearing this, Catherine was visibly panicked. She was afraid the Duchess would find out she wasn't her biological daughter. She tried to deflect by saying magic was boring, but the protagonist persisted, arguing that magic was too useful to pass up. Diana said it was all for Catherine's future. As the only daughter of Duke Ernest, if she inherited the title, magic would be extremely useful. Moreover, it was also an opportunity to meet the young Master Sawyer. Hearing that, Catherine's eyes lit up, and she immediately agreed to learn magic. Ruhr also nodded, and the protagonist thanked him, saying they would start next week. Ruhr replied that he wanted to teach her privately, apologizing that it was now too late. With that, he left and vanished into thin air. The protagonist hadn't expected her teacher's final words, and her cheeks flushed slightly. Alice froze when she saw Diana standing there. With so many people watching, she couldn't ignore Diana. Alice asked, "Where has your highness been?" Diana replied that she was just in the garden, having invited the magic tutor over earlier. She also mentioned that Calypso had gotten jealous when he saw the teacher. Alice frowned. "What do you mean?" Diana said, "My husband's voice sounded clearly annoyed when I introduced the teacher." The doctor interjected, saying that was surely impossible. The protagonist added that Calypso even started an argument. Diana, for her part, wanted to see that expression again, but Alice abruptly said she had to go. She didn't understand any of this. Calypso was hers. He would never be jealous over Diana or any other man. The protagonist silently prayed for Alice to wait a little longer until she had stripped away everything from Alice. The doctor used the excuse of a health checkup to go into Catherine's room. She immediately froze when she heard her daughter's hoarse voice. Catherine said she wasn't sick, just that Diana made her read boring books for hours on end. It was like this every day. She recounted how her fake mother, the Duchess, had deliberately canceled the meeting with young Master Sawyer and then scolded her. Before that, Diana had replaced all the maids, and now she dared to touch Alice's daughter. Catherine guessed that the Duchess had become more sensitive since going blind. But there was something more important. From now on, Catherine would have to learn magic with Diana. Alice was stunned, and her mouth fell open upon hearing the news. Alice had always longed to learn magic, but Catherine also thought she had a chance, even though it was clear she had no magic at all. Although Alice was one of the top doctors, a real mage was not so easily fooled. Catherine now had no idea what to do. She was trapped and couldn't back out. Alice stared at the bookshelf and came up with a plan. Isol, who was always timid and reserved, asked the two women why they had called her so urgently. 5 years ago, Catherine had caught her real mother cheating with her father and thus discovered the truth. She knew this woman was her mother's best friend. Alice fell to her knees, but Catherine called her a liar and threatened to tell her mother. It was then that the Real bomb dropped. Catherine was Alice's daughter. Catherine was speechless for a moment, but her father confirmed it very seriously, his words hitting like a train crash. Catherine's head was spinning. If the news got out that she wasn't Diana's biological daughter, it would spread like wildfire, and social circles would be in an uproar. In that case, the Duchess would surely turn her back on her. Catherine was smart enough to realize what was happening, so she asked where Diana's real daughter was. It turned out the child was growing up with orphans. Alice told her daughter that those children were of very low birth, while Catherine was considered to be of great value, especially destined to become a real duchess later on. Alice explained clearly to Isol what to do, but the child only saw herself as an ordinary person with no magic, so she thought she couldn't be of any help. She intended to find an experienced mage to train her, at least to give the blonde girl a chance. Isol was sent to help the Duchess and continue pretending as if nothing was wrong. Catherine slapped her. That lowborn creature had been spouting nonsense all day. And so, Alice's daughter decided to remind Isol of her place. The girl started screaming at Isol, telling her to shut up and not ask any more questions. Just as Catherine raised her shoe to strike, Alice yelled for her to stop. Her daughter screamed that she couldn't stand the annoying little thing anymore and locked her behind the sliding shelf once again. Alice promised her daughter that she would let the kid meet the tutor tomorrow, so she told Catherine not to mind it. She reminded her daughter that she was the real Duchess. The next morning, the weather was perfect, so the protagonist decided to practice magic outdoors to enjoy the air. She focused and released her power at that very moment. At the same time, her real daughter was trying to perform the same trick, but couldn't even produce a single spark of ice. Alice asked the mage about the situation. He said the girl had potential, but it was hidden under a shell of mediocrity. Despite her low mana, she should have been able to create a small spark. It seemed this child was not cut out for it. Alice truly wished Diana could hear this. Even if that kid was Diana's own flesh and blood, she was still just a lump of useless potential. But Alice told the mage that they didn't need a magical prodigy, just for the child to learn how to summon a basic spell before next week. And the teacher promised to try his best. Diana smirked, curious to see how Catherine would manage this time. That girl had a huge ego, but no real ability. As usual, the protagonist began to wonder if her daughter would become a copy of herself. She would do anything to find that lovely daughter of hers again. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Milan, the maid, told Diana that she had brought lunch. Diana allowed her to enter. Milan quickly set everything up, and Diana thanked her. But she wasn't hungry at all. Outside the window, she saw a familiar shock of bright red hair. Diana shot up as soon as she realized who was standing on the balcony. Ruhr smiled and told her to open the window. He had come for an extra lesson. They didn't have enough time last time due to constant interruptions. Diana thanked Ruhr for his thoughtfulness and invited him to lunch. The mage was about to refuse since he came to teach her, but Diana explained that she just wanted to have a meal together, as there were many things she wanted to ask. Ruhr blushed slightly but nodded. Every dish looked delicious. He picked up his utensils and immediately took a piece of steak. Diana thought that mages would be more relaxed while eating, but Ruhr ate with extreme politeness, making her feel as if she were dining in the royal palace. She asked him directly if he was actually eating, as she couldn't hear a thing. Ruhr said he was trained from a young age. He grew up in an orphanage and only found his biological parents later. Diana realized she probably shouldn't have brought that up. Ruhr said the orphanage wasn't so bad, thanks to one person. Diana looked at her teacher sadly. For someone who had just said those things, he looked even more pensive. The protagonist wondered, did that part of his memory really hurt him that much? A few days passed. Catherine walked in with a smug smile, announcing that she was back. Ruhr bowed to the young lady, then casually asked, "Who is the witch accompanying you?" Alice flared up, "I am not a witch. I am the ducal family's personal physician, part of the staff here." She had heard the young lady was learning magic, so she came to check. The protagonist smiled at her best friend and said she could watch for as long as she liked. Ruhr decided to start by testing the young lady's abilities to assess her level. At the same time, Isol was hiding behind the second floor curtain. Not long ago, Alice had suggested trying one more time. Catherine held out her hand, and the protagonist's real daughter summoned Frost. The mother and daughter beamed, confident that everything would be fine. The class was about to start, so Alice told her daughter to go there with her. Catherine yelled at the commoner to do it now. Isol was gathering all her determination to act. If Catherine had mana, she would feel it flowing through her body, and the girl declared firmly that she could feel it. Ruhr suggested she try to focus the mana in her hand. Catherine was sure she would succeed. After all, that commoner would help her cast the spell. She held out her hand, and nothing happened. Alice and Catherine froze, realization dawning in a moment of tense silence. Then the girl screamed, "This can't be happening." Diana asked in confusion, "What's the result?" Ruhr told the young lady that she had failed. Alice immediately interjected, explaining that perhaps the girl was just nervous and could try again. But no matter how many times she tried, the result was the same. The young lady had absolutely no magical power. The protagonist asked in shock, "Isn't magic supposed to be easier to manifest when you're young? And it's passed down through bloodline, too. It's strange, since Catherine is my daughter." Ruhr confirmed it. No one had ever seen anything like this before. Catherine's whole body trembled with anger, her mind wanting to shoot daggers at the commoner girl. "How dare you embarrass me like this?" There was nothing more to be done. Diana announced that Catherine would have to learn magic on her own. The girl screamed that there must be some mistake. But a true lady must also understand that she can't be good at everything. Catherine yelled that she hated everything and stormed off. She didn't need to get so worked up. Things were about to get much worse, and the protagonist would make sure of it. Catherine was furious that Isol had ruined everything. She needed to keep Diana on her side if she wanted any chance with young Master Sawyer. Alice's daughter decided she would kill that commoner girl. She burst into the room, but no one was there. Alice guessed Catherine was completely devastated. But only Diana was truly disappointed. Catherine's complaints were just empty shells with nothing inside. The protagonist confessed she felt a little guilty. Ruhr thought Catherine was someone who always tried to please others, just like the family doctor. Diana laughed. "We're the same age. That's why my daughter can bond with Alice." Alice said she would go check on the young lady. The protagonist smiled and told her best friend, "You're always the one who cares about us, both me and Catherine." The girl ran in, panicked, to tell her mother that the commoner had escaped. Alice was stunned when she heard that. The entire room had been frozen over. It turned out her own foolish daughter had kicked the door and run away during the magic lesson. Alice couldn't believe it. Isol had been hiding her powers all this time. Now it was time to find the girl. If only Diana could see her daughter again, things would surely be different. Suddenly, her trusted maids ran up to her. The protagonist asked what had happened. It turned out Julia had just secretly left the mansion. Since the protagonist hadn't given any orders, it looked very suspicious. Julia was Alice's only remaining ally, so she was probably following her orders. It was finally time for tea with Julia. The servant entered the lady's room. She asked why she had been summoned. The Duchess smiled, saying she just wanted to chat. But first, she offered a cup of Tiro chamomile, very good for fatigue. Julia took a small sip, suspecting nothing. But immediately, she realized it wasn't chamomile tea. A flash of lightning lit up the window as the protagonist asked coldly, "Where's my daughter right now?" Julia coughed, saying she didn't understand what her mistress was talking about. But the protagonist knew Julia was involved in this, and spitting out the tea wouldn't help anymore. Just one drop of truth serum was enough to make a person confess everything. Diana was the only one in the mansion who could concoct it, as it was an alchemical potion created with magic. The protagonist repeated her question one more time, and this time, Julia replied that the girl had run away. Diana was stunned, not expecting to hear such an answer. For Julia, training new servants was always a nuisance, and recently Lady Alice hadn't been sharing much with her. But today, Alice told Julia that Isol had run away. They were talking about the annoying kid Alice kept hiding, and it turned out she had used magic to escape. Alice ordered her to find the girl and bring her back by any means necessary after being paid in full. Julia decided to start the search immediately. Diana's real daughter worked as a maid in Catherine's room, but that other girl tormented her every day. Perhaps the child couldn't take it anymore and ran away. Diana then asked what the girl looked like. Isol had blonde hair and emerald green eyes, just like the protagonist. Diana started screaming at Julia that she knew everything and still chose to side with the other party. But Julia just laughed loudly, her laughter echoing like a mockery. Julia didn't often get to see tragedies like this, so she just burst out laughing, while Diana couldn't stop her tears. Isol ran at full speed until she was exhausted and collapsed. The girl realized she couldn't move and felt someone standing behind her. For Julia, this whole affair was too interesting, and that was why she loved Alice to the point of madness. The protagonist couldn't stand it anymore, so she called for Belinda and ordered, "Kill that wench immediately." The girl didn't even have time to react, too stunned by the command. But now Diana started begging Belinda to get that monster out of her sight, and the girl complied, the servant hastily wiping the bloodstain from the floor. This was the first time the protagonist had killed someone with her own hands. Diana couldn't let herself appear weak in this house full of deceivers, so she bit her lip to hold back her tears. There was still business to handle. She told Milan to bring Catherine to the drawing room. The important thing now was to make sure the young lady was waiting for her there. At that moment, Isol used her last bit of magic to fight back against the mysterious cloaked figure. But he kept dodging and blocking her attacks with his shield. He didn't counterattack again. Isol didn't know who he was but guessed he was sent from the mansion to capture her. Her head started to spin as she realized she had exhausted her strength. She couldn't fight anymore, and finally, the girl fainted. The caretaker at the orphanage was settling the children for the night when there was a sudden knock on the door. When she opened it, a man in a black cloak stood before her. She asked what he was doing here in this weather. He explained that he needed to deliver this child. The caretaker realized the girl was in bad shape and told him to come inside with her, and a stranger followed without hesitation. Diana's daughter had been working as a maid in Catherine's room all this time. Near the bookshelf, the protagonist discovered remnants of magical energy. She quickly realized there was a secret room behind the bookshelf and pushed it aside. Inside, she discovered a small, dusty room. It turned out Alice had intentionally built this room and locked the protagonist's daughter right behind her back. Diana found a moldy loaf of bread, the same kind the girl had once managed to bring to her mother. At that moment, her legs could no longer support her, and she collapsed to the floor, her heart heavy. Even though her daughter was in pain, she still brought bread for her. Catherine, meanwhile, was getting tired of waiting for the Duchess. As soon as the protagonist entered the drawing room, she immediately apologized to Catherine for keeping her waiting. Diana said she was thinking of finding her a new magic tutor. The Duchess thought that Ruhr was simply not teaching her properly. Catherine said in confusion that she had no time for magic with her packed schedule of etiquette lessons for her debut. But the protagonist believed that one must learn magic at this age or regret it later. In truth, Diana simply wanted this brat to suffer twice as much as her own daughter. Catherine asked for permission to leave, and the protagonist let her go. The girl told her mother to take care of herself and then left the drawing room. The protagonist later found her daughter's personal diary among the girl's belongings and secretly took it. Reading just a few pages left Diana in deep shock. She couldn't believe that this child had lived all this time, always knowing that the mistress of the manor was her real mother. She knew the Duchess was always loving another child. Now the protagonist understood. Her daughter was just disappointed in her, which is why she left. Diana began to beg for forgiveness, pleading for her daughter to wait just a little longer until she could find her. Alice, meanwhile, felt that this situation was strange. She checked every room, asked the other maids, but couldn't find Julia anywhere. The maid had vanished without a trace. Now it was all clear why there had been no news from Julia for days. Something sudden and dangerous must have happened. Alice suddenly heard Diana call her name. The protagonist wondered if something was wrong, because Son had said the family doctor's expression looked very unusual that day. Alice said she was fine and asked the Duchess where she was going. Diana created a block of ice, saying she had a magic lesson today. Suddenly, the protagonist's magical energy unexpectedly reacted with Alice. She was knocked to the floor, startling. Diana, what has happened? Son told the Duchess that her magic had backfired and blown up Alice's dress. Diana had not anticipated that at all. As expected, she was still a novice in the field of magic. She immediately asked if Alice was okay. The Duke's mistress was trembling like a leaf, but still said, "I'm fine." Then she stood up, said she was going upstairs, and told the Duchess to continue her lesson. This situation had ignited a fire within Alice. The protagonist began to track where her husband's mistress was going. She then ordered her trusted maid to immediately send a servant with tea to Calypso's office. At that moment, the Duke was reviewing documents. Alice burst into the office and screamed, "I can't take it anymore." While the two were talking, the maid brought in the tea and then quietly left, leaving the door intentionally ajar. Now Diana could hear the entire conversation. Alice was completely serious. She wanted to know exactly when Calypso would marry her and make her his legal wife. That man told her to wait a little longer because Diana was still alive. But Alice had no intention of waiting until that fool grew old and dropped dead. Calypso replied icily, "We'll wait until the Marquis hands over something truly important." Diana wondered what that important thing could be. The Duke was in desperate need of money. He married Diana just to escape his debts. The Marquis had promised to hand over the diamond mine after Catherine's societal debut. Calypso told Alice to be patient until then. The protagonist knew very well that the day of Catherine's debut was also the day she would die. Her father's diamond mine was the reason those two had kept her alive until now. All of this was happening without her father knowing that his real daughter and granddaughter were slowly dying. He was even throwing a party for the fake granddaughter, planning to hand over the diamond mine to her. It was all so disgusting that the protagonist couldn't comprehend it. Diana had been suspicious, but she never thought the truth would be this terrible. This entire mansion was a nightmare. The lesson ended, but Diana still hadn't arrived. It turned out she was just a little late. Ruhr was very happy to see Duchess Diana. She immediately apologized, her voice a little unusual for keeping him waiting. Ruhr found it strange and asked if she was okay. Duchess Diana nodded, deciding to rest for a bit. But Ruhr immediately grabbed her by the wrist. He didn't understand why Diana was lying to him now and asked her to look him in the eye. But the Duchess reminded him that she couldn't see anything. Yet Ruhr, without a hint of doubt, said that she could see everything. Duchess Diana froze when she heard him say that. She quickly led him to her room, pushed him against the wall, and asked how he knew. Ruhr smiled, complimenting her strength. Duchess Diana immediately removed her blindfold, demanding the mage to answer at once how he knew her secret. She didn't understand why he had pretended not to know when it was clear he knew everything. Suddenly, Ruhr told the protagonist that he liked her. The young woman looked at him with suspicious eyes and told him to repeat what he had just said. Ruhr added that he also liked her courage. It turned out he let himself be deceived only because he had a secret crush on Diana. But the main character made it clear that she didn't want to play such games. The magician reminded her that he was hired by the Marquis. That alone was enough to help the Holy Force family. Not everyone was worthy of that title. Therefore, Ruhr trusted the main character. Perhaps he would help Diana with a small matter. So the main character immediately grabbed his sleeve and pleaded for help. Afterwards, Diana found herself sitting opposite her husband. He had just sent for her. Calypso told his wife that an invitation had just been sent for her. The Abbé Dactum family is one of the most prestigious families in the capital, the center of high society. They were hosting a special tea party, and it was on that occasion that Diana received the invitation. Calypso had to arrange Catherine's engagement, so he had to accept the other duke's invitation. The man acted as if he was confiding in his wife that he was truly worried. It was the same old act, pretending to care for Diana while secretly sending Alice to that party. He kept trying to push the main character to integrate with the arrogant noble women that Calypso feared. Those gossip-loving nobles might hurt his wife's soft heart, and that would break Diana's heart. Catherine said she would be disappointed if she didn't show up. She liked young Master Sawyer. The Duke suggested sending Alice instead, and the main character agreed. Now it was time to head to the tea party. Alice wore a lovely, soft, light blue dress. The very dress that the fool Diana had specially ordered from a top tailor just to show off. Catherine was overjoyed because she would finally get to meet the young master. Finally, she would get to meet the young master. Alice just smiled. She must have been very happy inside. The main character stepped forward. It had been quite a while since the last tea party at the Abbé Dactum house. Diana appeared only to see her daughter and best friend off. The Duke apologized. "It's a real pity I still can't go." Diana knew very well she couldn't go to the tea party with her eyes like that. Calypso said that it was impossible unless a miracle happened. Suddenly, the characters heard someone running in a hurry. They saw the high priest rushing towards her, laughing like a madman and shouting, "I've found your sight. It's floating around somewhere." The bewildered main character asked what he was talking about. Alice stepped up to face the Duchess and declared Diana traded her sight for a divine blessing. But the priest said, "I just want to restore the lady's sight." He took out his priest's emblem. Valinda whispered to her master, "He's not lying." Alice began to feel anxious. This didn't make sense. The main character was sure she had passed her sight to her daughter, so this should have been impossible. The priest smiled and said this was truly a miracle. He closed his eyes, felt the flow of energy in the air, and then focused it on one point. If Diana places her hand on this crystal, her sight will return immediately. Everything will go back to normal. Catherine exclaimed, "That can't be real." Alice immediately chimed in. "We have no idea what the result will be." But Diana turned to her daughter. "Remember the feeling of living in darkness." The main character was ready to seize any opportunity, no matter how absurd, as long as there was a chance it would work. The energy hidden in the crystal was indeed sacred. Diana turned to Valinda. "Help me." The servant quickly helped her touch the crystal. It flashed brilliantly, forcing everyone to shut their eyes tightly. A dazzling, pure, and sacred stream of blue light pierced the main character. As soon as the light faded, Calypso called out to his wife. Now, the main character could see everything again. The Duke, Alice, and Catherine were stunned by the news. The other servants were overjoyed, running to congratulate their master, certain that the heavens had been moved by her kindness. Afterwards, Calypso and Alice also joined in the congratulations. Diana pulled Catherine into a tight hug, acting as if she was crying with joy at seeing her daughter's face again. Tears of happiness streamed from the main character's eyes. Everyone around was moved to the core. While no one was paying attention, the priest quietly withdrew. As soon as he turned a hidden corner, Rayer transformed back to his true form and muttered, "This fake miracle trick is insane." Before, the main character had a reason to feign blindness, but now it was meaningless. Diana had understood their motives, and now just needed to find her daughter. While blind, she was very limited in her search. So the main character decided to stage a fake miracle. The Duchess declared she wanted to open her eyes again and asked Rayer for help. He just spread his hands and said he was too soft-hearted to refuse when someone looked at him like that. As long as she asked, Rayer would do everything he could. Now that Diana could present her plan, Catherine suddenly pushed the main character away and asked, trembling, "What if my eyesight gets damaged? If something goes wrong?" Diana completely understood that fear, but she saw no reason to panic. The main character told Catherine that she had never been sick, so she couldn't have inherited the vision problem from her. The Duchess looked up at the sky and said, "This is truly a miracle." Noticing Catherine seemed strange, the main character asked if she was tired. The girl shrugged. "It's probably just a slight cold, so I might look a little strange." Diana immediately told Alice to stay behind to look after Catherine. "I can't take her in this condition. You both need to rest today." Sending Alice in the Duchess's place was completely unreasonable, so the main character decided to go to the tea party herself, especially now that her sight had returned. As soon as Diana left to change, the Duke snorted in annoyance, even though he had arranged everything. Alice couldn't stand it anymore. Things were getting more complicated. Diana finished changing and was ready to leave. Catherine rushed over, begging to go with them, insisting she was much better now. As long as she could be near young Master Sawyer, Catherine couldn't care less about her mother. She was determined to become Diana's real daughter. The main character replied that if she brought Catherine along, she would be very happy to spend the whole day with the girl. Now, Diana could take care of both Catherine and Alice, to make them fall into despair even faster. The carriage rolled away, while Alice fell to her knees on the ground. The weather was beautiful that day, and Diana wondered how long it had been since she went out without being covered in bandages. The journey from the duchy to the capital usually took 3 days, but thanks to a teleportation gate, it only took an hour. Diana glanced at Catherine as the girl said she was very glad everything was resolved. Catherine confessed that she had always felt guilty. So Diana asked Catherine to continue reading to her to ease the burden on her heart. Hearing her daughter's voice, sweet as a songbird, made the Duchess feel a strange joy, as if living in a beautiful dream. Catherine agreed immediately and said she enjoyed it very much too. The orphans were having apple pie today. If the boys were late, there wouldn't be any left, so the kids decided to run as fast as they could. One of them accidentally bumped into Isolde as they passed. Catherine looked out the window and told her mother they had arrived. The other person's mansion was so magnificent it left the girl speechless. Diana suggested they go inside. The ladies of the house were astonished to see the Duchess, whose situation they knew well, now standing before them, as healthy as if nothing had happened. Diana said, "Fortunately, today was truly a miracle." Duchess Serena Z.E. Sawyer came out into the hallway, delighted to see she was safe and sound. Serena confessed she was a little hurt to learn that the visitor was the family doctor and not the Duchess. Diana apologized sincerely, saying that was also why she rushed here as soon as she felt better. The main character told Catherine to greet the Duchess. The girl curtsied and introduced herself enthusiastically. Serena looked closely at the Duchess's daughter's face, remarking that she was very cute. She led them to the room where the children were having refreshments. Serena suggested Catherine join them to play, and of course, the girl happily agreed. But then, suddenly, the main character said that wouldn't be a good idea. Catherine turned to look at her mother, a confused expression on her face. Diana explained that her daughter had a cold and shouldn't have close contact with the other children lest she spread it. Catherine glared at her mother. "What are you talking about?" Then she suddenly understood they were in front of the ladies. The main character silently begged Catherine not to be angry. This was just a consequence of her own lie. Serena guessed that the Duchess's daughter could meet the children next time. In the end, Catherine stayed by Diana's side throughout the tea party. On the way back, the main character asked the girl if she had fun. Catherine was certain that if Duchess Sawyer weren't her future mother-in-law, she would have flipped the tea table. Looking out the window, Diana wondered if the sunset was always this beautiful. The carriage rattled on a crowded street when the main character suddenly froze upon seeing a little blonde girl. She darted into an alley, and the Duchess immediately ordered the driver to stop the carriage. Diana quickly opened the door, saying she had urgent business. She told the driver to take Catherine home first, then come back for her immediately. The carriage left, and the main character stared into the alley where the blonde girl had just disappeared, then immediately gave chase. Diana finally reached the orphanage, still on the Duchess's grounds. She asked some passing children if they knew a blonde girl. The children immediately recognized who she was talking about, but didn't know her name, and she asked if they knew where the girl was. Diana froze when they pointed toward a girl. At that moment, Isolde had finished washing the dishes and tidying the table, but while she was taking care of everything, the others were still causing a ruckus. Suddenly, someone grabbed her hand. Isolde froze in surprise and immediately saw her mother standing right in front of her. Diana couldn't believe she had forgotten that feeling, the feeling of holding her daughter's cold body. She immediately pulled her daughter into her arms. The main character asked the girl's name, her voice trembling, and Isolde introduced herself. The Duchess held her daughter tightly, apologizing endlessly, constantly begging for forgiveness. She also apologized to Iso for not recognizing her all this time. The mother and daughter decided to sit on a stone bench to talk. The main character gently took her biological daughter's hand. Diana asked how she knew the truth, that she was her real mother. Iso wasn't sure the Duchess would believe her story because it was so vivid, to the point she didn't know what was a dream and what was real. The main character was stunned when Iso calmly said that she had seen the future. Diana couldn't believe Iso had also been through the same hell as her. Iso knew this was hard to believe, but the main character held her daughter's hand and swore she would believe everything, no matter what she said now. Therefore, Diana begged her daughter to tell her every detail about the future. As soon as Iso was born, she was taken to the orphanage. The manager there saw her from the very beginning. Iso grew up there until she was old enough to leave, always worrying about where she would sleep at night and what she would eat the next day. Then Alice appeared, saying that from now on she would be the Duchess's daughter's maid and that she had better be grateful. Back then, Iso was ecstatic, but the joy didn't last long. Catherine constantly screamed at her, cursed her, and made her work non-stop. She called Iso useless trash time and time again. Once, Catherine grabbed Iso's hair and pulled it hard, ignoring her pleas to stop. Iso lived in a cramped room in the back. Once, being so hungry, she grabbed a piece of moldy bread, but when she saw a bug crawl out, she immediately threw it away. She didn't know how much longer she could endure it. It was as if she were being treated like an animal, not a human. Iso didn't understand what she had done wrong. One day, while cleaning the young lady's room, the family's private doctor suddenly knocked on the door, announcing her arrival to the young lady. Alice immediately told Iso to get out. The girl quickly stepped into the hallway, but out of curiosity, Iso decided to eavesdrop. The doctor told the young lady that she had found out about it. It turned out the Duchess knew about the relationship between Alice and the Duke. Iso was stunned, unable to believe Alice was having an affair with the Duke. Poor Duchess, she had just gone blind. But Iso didn't understand why Alice would tell this secret to Catherine, the Duchess's daughter. Now Alice was planning to lock Diana away somewhere far away, where no one could find her. Suddenly, Catherine turned to the doctor with the worried look of a daughter concerned for her mother, asking if everything would be all right. Alice threw up her hands in frustration, reminding them that the Duchess was blind, and if they handed over the diamond mine before Catherine's debut, it would all be over. Then Alice would become the Duchess. On the day Diana died, they also had to dispose of that girl, so Calypso wouldn't know his real daughter was still alive. Iso collapsed to the floor, too weak to stand up. She couldn't believe that she was the Duchess's real daughter. Now, Iso understood everything, knowing the reason why Alice had locked her up. This whole family was a sham, and the Duke had hidden his connection with Alice right in front of his wife. Iso swore she would never forgive them. She shot up, feeling a surge of power. Snowflakes suddenly appeared out of thin air, astonishing her. Iso didn't understand what was happening, but she really had magic. She didn't know why she had this power, but she knew she had to save her mother. It was late at night, and Catherine was fast asleep. A lock had been placed on the door of the secret room. The girl wondered if this was just luck, but she had to get out tonight. Regardless, Iso decided to try one more time. She used her magic again. She smiled brightly when she realized it had worked. The door was open. She put on a cloak, grabbed a loaf of bread, and snuck out. According to rumors, Alice planned to lock the Duchess in a hut outside the ducal territory. ISO found the place. As soon as she opened the door, she saw her mother. The Duchess immediately asked who was there, but the girl was frozen to the spot, unable to utter a word. ISO was horrified by her mother's condition. She gave her the loaf of bread and left the hut without a word. ISO silently prayed for her mother to endure a little longer, to give her time to regain her strength and save her. She ran, tears streaming down her cheeks, desperately begging her to wait a little longer. The little girl had no idea that Alice had been secretly watching her. From the beginning, several days passed. ISO practiced her magic every day and was now much more proficient than before. Despite being exhausted from hunger, for her mother's sake, she gritted her teeth and endured as long as she could help her. Finally, ISO returned to the hut. The Duchess was still calling Catherine's name, and those words stabbed ISO's heart. She was her daughter, but ISO remained silent. Of course, ISO returned to the mansion, not knowing when she would be able to tell the truth so they could both escape. But as she neared the gate, archers with drawn bows blocked her path. Alice sneered mockingly. "Enjoy your night walk?" Catherine already told her father. This brat dared to ignore the order not to go to the hut. Calypso scratched his head, wondering if they had such a young maid. ISO guessed this must be her father, for daring to disobey his order. The Duke had to punish her severely. The family rules spare no one. Alice growled, "Killing you isn't enough." But ISO just gave a faint smile at her words. Catherine rushed in, swinging her hand to strike. This brat clearly doesn't know who she's messing with. But ISO was determined not to let anyone hit her again. Her magic instantly froze Catherine's arm. Alice and the Duke froze. The space fell silent. Catherine screamed in pain. The Duke waved his hand and yelled, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" ISO stood frozen as a rain of arrows fell upon her. She could use magic, she should have, but she didn't. 4 arrows pierced her body in an instant. The Duke comforted his daughter, having no idea he had just killed his own flesh and blood. ISO couldn't understand why he didn't recognize her. So many burning questions were in her heart, but she couldn't ask them anymore. Her eyes flew open, her breath coming in ragged gasps, not yet realizing what had just happened. Looking around, she saw she was in her room. ISO didn't understand why she wasn't dead. She had definitely been shot with arrows. Just then, Catherine kicked a cabinet hard and yelled for the maid to come out. She ordered her to clean up all the broken glass. ISO still couldn't believe this was real. Somehow, she had gone back in time. Now ISO had a new chance. She would not live like before. She was determined to change her life and her mother's. Back in the present, ISO thought the Duchess wouldn't believe her, but Diana burst into tears. She told her daughter that she had also returned to the past. ISO trembled. This was impossible. The main character realized it wasn't a coincidence that they had both returned and remembered everything. Her daughter confessed she wanted revenge. She hated Alice and Catherine to the bone for what they had done. She hated her father just as much. ISO swore to take revenge on every single person who had ruined her past life. Diana couldn't imagine how much hardship and pain her daughter had endured. She knew it would be cruel to oppose revenge now, so she just nodded silently. The Duchess apologized to the driver for making him wait. He waved his hand, saying it was fine, but was surprised to see the child standing next to her. He asked, "Who is this child?" Diana didn't answer, only saying, "Take us to the Force Mansion." As the carriage started moving, ISO beamed. Diana asked why, and the girl smiled brightly. "This is the first time I've ever sat on such a soft seat." Diana sighed. "First of all, you need to eat and put some meat on your bones." ISO guessed her grandfather would probably hate the sight of her. At the orphanage, they said the Marquis came from a wealthy, noble family. She thought she looked pathetic compared to him. Diana shook her head. "That's not true. He's strict, but when you meet him, you'll understand everything." The maids and servants were stunned to see their young lady with a child. Marquis Forrest was quickly informed of his daughter's arrival. Diana walked straight into her father's office to tell him everything and introduce his real granddaughter. The old man frowned upon seeing his daughter bring a child late at night. The Marquis didn't understand what she was saying, but the main character calmly replied that she would explain shortly. She knew it would be hard to make him believe. When Diana finished speaking, the Marquis was red with anger. How dare Calypso betray me and switch the child? But the main character told him to calm down. He didn't understand how his daughter could be so calm. Diana explained she was just waiting for the perfect opportunity to crush her enemies and wanted her father's help. The Marquis couldn't believe that his daughter, more precious than his own life, had endured it all alone. He didn't understand why she wanted to return to that den of betrayal. The Marquis decided to ask his granddaughter how she had been living all this time. She told him she worked as a maid in Catherine's room. Diana's father asked her to tell him the entire plan. He would help her. The main character gathered everyone in the family around the table because she was about to announce something. Calypso was curious to know what exactly it was. Diana said she wanted to adopt a girl. The Duke and Alice were stunned by the main character's unexpected announcement. Catherine jumped up from her chair, reminding her mother that she still had her as a daughter. But the main character explained that her father had written to inform her he had found a foster relative at an orphanage. Diana didn't know the full story, only that there was no one to raise the girl. Catherine screamed that she didn't need a sister. But the main character calmly said, "It's time for you to grow up." Catherine might change if she had someone to compare herself to. A maid came to inform the Duchess that the girl had arrived. ISO entered the dining room where everyone was sitting and immediately bowed according to proper etiquette. Catherine was stunned to see the familiar face. Then Catherine called out the girl's name. The story flashes back 2 weeks. Although ISO shared the Duchess's bloodline, the girl was the spitting image of her mother. That night, Diana left her father's mansion. Before leaving, she asked her father and Liz to take care of ISO. The next morning, Liz pulled open the curtains, telling ISO it was time to wake up. ISO realized yesterday wasn't a dream. The maid was a little suspicious, but the girl quickly said everything was fine while having her own thoughts. The Duchess's daughter nearly went wild when the maids brought out a series of luxurious dresses. The girl couldn't believe everything had been prepared so quickly, even though she had only arrived the previous night. Liz chuckled, explaining that the whole town was bustling last night in a flurry of activity. The Marquis paid double for the girl's dresses to be made urgently. Now all those dresses belonged to ISO, though Liz was concerned they weren't exquisite enough. But the girl found them wonderful. First, ISO needed a bath. Liz said a few maids would help her undress. The girl hesitated, saying she could bathe herself, but they told her to just relax. Liz's heart ached for the young lady's daughter, who had suffered in the orphanage. As they were putting the girl's hair up, a maid informed her she could get into the bath. The water was perfectly warm. Seeing a maid pour something into the water, ISO asked if she could use it. It was a luxurious bath oil. ISO knew Catherine had desperately wanted to buy it, but the Marquis said that during his granddaughter's stay, she would use only the best. ISO was no longer an orphan, and certainly not a maid who cleaned bookshelves. The girl nodded in agreement with Liz's words. Marquis Forrest was now sitting in the dining room, eagerly waiting for his granddaughter to appear. ISO entered, looking much brighter. "Thank you for the beautiful dress." He said it was nothing, just some spare clothes from the mansion. ISO chuckled because Liz had told her everything. When the food was served, everything looked delicious. The Marquis told his granddaughter to eat as much as she wanted, but ISO was clumsy, not knowing how to use a knife and fork. She was afraid of being scolded for eating incorrectly. The Marquis pushed a plate of food in front of her, telling her not to worry. Everything could be learned. ISO picked up her fork, thanked him, and wished him a good meal. The Marquis smiled, telling her to call him grandfather because she was now his only grandchild. Watching her eat heartily, he thought he would prepare more dishes next time. Suddenly, ISO stopped and told him she had a request. "Please help me quickly become a perfect lady to support my mother." The Marquis said Diana's revenge plan was enough, but ISO insisted, "I have to protect my mother." He recalled his daughter's words, that she would wait for the right time to counterattack. Looking at ISO now, he realized his grandchild was a carbon copy of her mother. He nodded, agreeing to do it. Back in the present, the main character introduced ISO to her husband. Then ISO sat down next to Catherine. Alice pressed her lips together, refusing to believe any of it. A tense atmosphere enveloped the dining table. Calypso told his wife she should be more careful about adoption and asked why she hadn't told him. The main character replied that her father had made a proposal because ISO had magical abilities. Diana wanted to send her and Catherine to the magic festival together. It was a competition organized by magic masters, open to all mages. Contestants could freely display their skills in front of the masters and have a chance to be recognized, from low to high level. Whoever won the fair match would receive a grand prize cries from the main character's father, possibly control of the diamond mine. Hearing this, Calypso froze, then shouted that it was supposed to be Catherine's debut gift. The main character smiled and told him not to worry. Everyone can see that the real daughter will defeat the fake one. Catherine froze, while ISO just pressed her lips into a slight smile. Alice suddenly shot up and announced she was leaving immediately. Something had clearly shocked her deeply. Catherine also followed, leaving Diana and her daughter sitting with the Duke. The main character asked ISO if the food was good, and the girl replied brightly that it was delicious. Diana handed her husband the adoption papers, telling him to process them today. Calypso knew it would be difficult to argue with his wife, and moreover, the Marquis's diamond mine was on the line, so he had no choice but to take the papers. The main character offered to give ISO a tour if she had finished eating. ISO nodded, stood up, and told her father they would talk more next time. The man froze upon hearing that form of address. On the way, Diana noticed ISO clenching her fists and asked why. ISO confessed she couldn't stand looking at the face of the man who had killed her. The main character understood immediately. Diana suggested saving the tour for later, but ISO immediately refused. She wanted to see Catherine's room right away. At the same time, Alice's daughter was crying in her room when she saw the Duchess arrive with ISO.